The cover of the book is a person sitting in front of a window. Well, that's me. There's a window right here, looking for answers, finding answers, planning. And as a planning person, right, you're like, let me grab all this, put it together, see what works. It's just good for you. And that links to your mind, right? Like what's the real root of why these numbers on a dashboard or a report are that way?
We're constantly being told to move faster, do more, and keep up. But at what cost? Whether you're leading high-stakes healthcare project or just trying to avoid burnout, the fundamentals of leadership and balance are more connected than we think. My guest today is Kevin Pannell, Navy veteran, emergency responder, healthcare IT leader, and author of the book, The Stability Equation. He has led through chaos, disaster, and complexity, and now helps others find clarity and strength through his 7-pillar framework for a more balanced life. Kevin, welcome. Let's get into what it really means to lead without losing yourself.
Thank you so much, Lucas. I appreciate the invite and the conversation. It's always good to talk to folks, especially fellow IT folks. It's a big profession, but always good to talk shop, so to speak, with other folks.
Brilliant. Thank you. So before we get into the frameworks that you propose and you author, and they resonate with me very strongly, tell us a bit more about your journey. How did your experiences in Navy shaped your emergency management, and how did that impact your healthcare IT work? What do you think about the leadership and life balance through your experiences? Please.
Sure. Yeah, I joined the Navy when I was 19, so very young exposure to both how being led and then becoming a leader. And that's a thing the military of, all over the world. But, for me, the U.S. Navy taught me is when you're very young, you become a leader right away through your experience, both that you learn as leadership through your specialty, which I was a corpsman, which is, if people don't know what this is, it's a medic, but in Navy, we call it a hospital corpsman. And so I worked mostly in critical care and intensive care units on the emergency room, essentially on the hospital ship Comfort. And so I was exposed to folks that were really sick, really hurt. You have to make snap decisions. And so that immediately set me up for triaging patients, right? Triaging people, triaging problems, which means treat the sickest people first, get the things that are going okay kind of out of the way, so to speak. And then in between, you kind of manage the yellow patients, if you will. And it's just like a stoplight, right? Red is worse, yellow's not quite as bad, and green's kind of walking wounded. So you can do the same thing for a project, which a lot of projects do, jump into that. And then so emergency management, it's also similar, but it's a bigger scale. So when you're an emergency manager, you're more facilitating solutions and logistics and planning and things like that. But you could take it from the individual patient, like I did as a corpsman, to a whole locality. So I was a public health emergency planner for a long time. And my objective, and I know we'll talk about objectives in a little bit, it was to provide a 10-day supply of antibiotics to over 300,000 residents in 48 hours, right? So that was my overarching objective for my whole job. It's a grant-funded thing with the Department of Health. And so training nurses how to use the incident command system, which is a methodology that parallels project management, that kind of stuff. It really resonated because in the Navy, you learn how to put together big operations. And in incident command, you learn how to put together big operations. And it's just different terminology. And that's what I carried with me too, that into project management. It's like, I'm bringing people together and I'm moving stuff around, and it's all the same. It's just, I'm in this uniform or that uniform or khakis or, something different. So it just really carried over. And I won't say that at the time I always went, here's the parallels, and then write about them or talk about them. But in the actions that took, I could tell they were related just from the experience, I'll say, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And this happens from the very beginning in the Navy, because my imagination of, I never served, right? So my vision of it is like you go in and you start somewhere at the very bottom of the ladder, right? Of the command structure, right?
For sure.
So do you need to go up in that ladder before you gain this experience, or is this something that happens naturally at every stage?
Yeah, good point. It's kind of both. So you're for sure, unless you've got like a certain amount of education, and I was enlisted. So I was enlisted in officers. Officers typically have a 4-year degree on up, and then you're commissioned. So, and then enlisted, I had, a semester of community college that I wasted, but I had, so it didn't really count toward giving, you can go in a little higher in the enlisted rank if you have like 2-year degree or something. So yeah, so I was an E1 or enlisted one. And the litmus test for, which is interesting, which is you could equate this to other things, but the litmus test for being advanced while you're in boot camp, because there's what's called petty officers, like supervisors level folks. And basically, if you stencil your T-shirt accurately and you don't screw up the simple things, then they promoted about 8 people in the class to be in charge of different things, right? And so I was okay at that, and other people had different leadership skills, and they go, "Oh, you're in." And so I was called the chalkboard petty officer. So now I
Okay.
was in the '90s, so take people back a little bit. So I had to write really nicely, like the plan of the day, and then stand watch and things like that. But when you do that, and then out of boot camp, I actually got advanced because I also painted our flag, and so you do things incremental, like good jobs, and they notice it and they go, "Oh, let's give you an advancement," which is money and more authority and things like that. And so if you basically keep doing a good job as you move up there, then there's tests you have to study. So when I was a corps, that was before I was trained as a corpsman. I was just a basic sailor, so to speak. Then after that, I went to corps school and was actually second in charge of my class. And they base it on kind of what they see from you when they assemble you, and who's squared away, and does your uniform look good, and like, are you good at exercise, and all these different factors. And so when it's a merit-based thing, just like in our workforce, right? Did that person do good? Whether your evaluation is going to be probably higher than the person who just kind of showed up and didn't do good. So it's very similar. At first, for sure, you're getting barked at, you're getting dropped to do push-ups, all these things, because it's the whole break you down, but you back up thing. But then after that, depending on what you do, or really overall the military, then it's largely merit-based. If you do good work, if you try hard, you're going to advance. And then that obviously resonates in life. Could there be barriers? Could there be obstacles? For sure. But largely, if you put the work in, you're going to do good.
Brilliant. Brilliant. It's thanks for this detailed explanation.
Absolutely.
It surprises me because when I think of any military, right, I think about a huge rigid structure.
Oh, yeah.
But when I think about IT projects, I think about agile, small, independent, self-managed, self-governed teams.
Right.
How does that compare?
Yeah, so that definitely depends on probably the branch and the unit and all that, just like it depends on the company, right? Like your software company,
Sure.
way agile, Scrum, we're doing stand-ups, like all these kind of things. Whereas if I'm a construction company, I'm probably waterfall all day long, or largely we have to put the power in before we put the data in, before we, that kind of stuff. So I think it just depends. So in the military, so when I was in the critical care unit, it would be like me and a nurse, and we'd have like 3 or 4 patients, right? How we took care of those patients was based on, the right thing to do, the moral stuff, all that, but also medically, what did we do? But I didn't plan my shift exactly like the other corpsman or nurse. So there's some variability in, and in quality, right? Not, and if you've been to the hospital with somebody, or, family, friends, whatever, that people take care of other people at different levels, right? Some people, you go in and visit your person and their hair's combed really nicely and they're shaven. And sometimes you go in and they're not. And you can tell that's from the person's, right? Is that person burnt out? That kind of stuff. So that still applies in the military. There are for sure rigid structures. There's a whole rank thing, and saluting and all that. And the paperwork you have to do. And now I'm sure it's more digital, but request to like go do something, or request for leave, or it's not dissimilar to the civilian workforce. It's for sure a bigger machine. I mean, it's the Department of Defense. It's enormous. There are other units that are much more Spartan. Like I wasn't a ranger, but know some folks that were, from the standpoint of they are very regimented, even at the high level of like a special operations force. But they live that just life because you need to, right? If you're going to deploy and go take over an airport or be like at the cutting edge, you got to be always ready to go. So not, hanging out and that kind of stuff. So it varies largely by unit, but there is rigidity. And I think that's something I've heard too in other discussions of podcasts is like, they think it's lockdown and everyone tells you what to do and all that. But I think you're actually rewarded more for being a free thinker, and the higher trained and skilled you are, the more people let you do that. So
fascinating.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because it goes against my common sense, right? But it makes a lot of sense at the end as you explained it. Yeah. Brilliant. I think I read the book about, I don't know what branch was it. I think it might have been some sort of special forces. And it was a while ago. It was Extreme Ownership.
Oh, yeah.
By Jocko
Willink.
Remember?
I'm a huge fan. So, yeah.
Yeah, extreme ownership. We love it in here as well.
Good.
It's a welcome book for a lot of people to
Good. Do you listen to the
in upper
podcast as
management.
well?
No, just a couple of episodes. I know
Okay.
how he looks like because I've seen some YouTube videos with him when he was in different interviews, but not
Yeah.
regularly. Not regularly. Hmm. Super. And in your book, when you talk about finding stability and especially through hard times, was there a moment in your own experience when you realized you needed a new approach to balance things in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, there were probably many, and some I ignored completely. Some I did some about, like, and in fact, it's great you mentioned, Jocko, because he was a big catalyst for it. Years ago, probably in 2016, 17, I was in emergency management. I was on calls, also volunteer firefighter. I was doing a lot, but not doing enough for me. And not taking care of myself, right? Not sleeping good, staying up late, having too many beers, like all the stuff that you're not supposed to do too much of. I did, and then being cranky and all this kind of stuff. And so, a good buddy of mine, Mike, said, "Hey, you should listen to this guy." And it was his podcast, Jocko's podcast. And I just put it off, right? I didn't. And then I finally did. And one, which, like, there's some pretty heavy stories early on, but it also gives you perspective on, taking extreme ownership. And of course, I read the book and his follow up book too. But, and that was the whole thing then. And so I followed suit of, okay, well, tomorrow, and I wasn't unfamiliar with exercising and getting out. I did really well in the military and on my own, but I'd gotten out of it. So I was out of shape. And so I set my alarm, got up 5:30, and then just started that. And since then did it. And that was kind of a reset. And then let myself kind of get back. And, the past few years, COVID, being isolated, working remote all the time, and similar thing. And then my dad got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And again, I was in a similar habit where I would work out a lot, but then I would stay up and I would play games. I would, too much, beer and that kind of stuff, and not eating. And so then really reset myself after I had a big panic attack, went to the hospital, did the whole thing. It's not your heart. You're just, this and that. And went down conventional medicine roads, we'll say. And the first thing they want to do is give you pills, frankly. And so not necessarily skills. And I forget who had said it, but they said, skills over pills, which I was like, oh, that's it. So worked through the system. I was like, you know what? I have to own this myself. And where I am now, which is the cover of the book, is a person sitting in front of a window. Well, that's me. There's a window right here, looking for answers, finding answers, planning. And as a planning person, right, you're like, let me grab all this, put it together, see what works. And so that's how I started to build those 7 pillars, for more stability. What helped me and what I knew helped others, because the other sources that I looked at. But it all started with ownership and falling back on some of the concepts. And I knew him. And even, when you listen to Jacques, like, he knows it. He got it from other folks. It's like the first thing, whether it's a project or your personal development, is you have to realize you have to change something, and you're the only one that can do it. You can't be looking for external guidance, help,
Yeah.
push at all. Not at all, but
Yeah.
not only.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You got to believe in it. You got to have what I call it a buy-in, right?
Mhm.
Internally to do this. Brilliant. Since you already mentioned your 7 pillars for successful projects, could you share which one you consider the most important and tell us why you believe they all matter in the end together?
I think, and they've changed, but I think overall, probably the definition of done, like, what does really done mean? Because, and I'm sure you've seen too, is projects can jump right to the solution. They can never talk about the solution. And I really started these 7 pillars with, there were what was called the big 3. So one of my mentors in incident management, that would be essentially a project team that would show up in a disaster and say, what do you need help with? Like, the Texas floods or a missing person or a big fire or whatever. And he was like, hey, if you can have objectives, smart objectives, if you can get resources and you can communicate, you can do anything. And so I was all in, and it worked. And for years we used that. And then I added, a couple other things. And so now, yeah, I think the definition of done, and that's come with me being exposed more to Agile and Scrum and those kind of things, and just adding a perspective. But yeah, starting with the leaders, and like, we have to know what the leader who's paying for this, who approved it, who did all those, we have to know what their intent is, which then
Of
leads you
course.
into, like, what is done, what's the problem you're trying to solve, which I think can easily get lost in either someone went to a conference and like, hey, this new product's good. And of course, selling things is, everything looks perfect when you're at a conference and it's on, as an example. But then, what's the intent of this project, whether it's big, small, it's devices, it's software, it's whatever. And then what does done look like, right? Is it just more of them? Is it saving time? It's to me along the lines of kind of a KPI, but not quite. And if you're an agile shop or Scrum, like you use definition of done, or hopefully do a lot. And so I thought,
Absolutely.
that one actually goes in there. And then the objectives, I'm still a big fan of SMART objectives, that
Yeah,
specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based, because
sure.
every kind of tactical thing you do should tie to one of those. And that was ingrained in me with, if we're standing with a big laminated board with a locality that's overwhelmed, and we say, okay, what are the problems you're facing? And then, we can narrow that down to 2 or 3 objectives that we can gear all the people, all the stuff, all the buildings, everything towards just those objectives, like sandbag this area within 12 hours or triage these patients, something like that. And then we can go, okay, we're going to need 2,000 bags and this many people and that kind of stuff. And that then leads you to the org structure, right? A functional one. And I say functional because to me, it's easy to say, this is the IT group, this is the policy group, this is the nursing group. It's very straightforward, like who's in that box on the org chart.
Okay.
And because we, in the incident management and then in projects, they do the 2 programs, it's, a functional one is what does the group do? What does that box of people do? And then a geographic one is, the North American branch or the European branch or something. So those are the 2 dividers we would kind of use. Is it geographic for like a big fire area? Or is it functional like a project team or something? But then those folks need stuff. So the next thing is resource coordination. And then I added like realistic, because you can ask for anything, but do you have the money? Do you have the, the logistics to do it, especially in some of the times, where the supply chain was just a mess, over the past 5-6 years, where it's hard to get equipment, like people, that kind of stuff. And I say realistic again, because where I came from incident management, you had to be very specific because, for example, there's like 7 different types of bulldozers. So I could say I need a dozer, and you're like, cool. And you get the biggest one that costs $10,000 an hour. And you're like, oh no, I just wanted like a little backhoe for
That's
my,
an overkill, right?
yeah, for sure. And the same thing happens in hardware software projects, right? Do I need the best coder in the world or someone that can do super basic work for now, so it
Yeah,
helps.
and how many times do we build, reinvent the wheel, right? Just
Yeah.
because everyone wants to build something on their own instead of using one of ready out of the shelf or open source solutions. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the, yeah, so then the resource, and then communication's always, something, but right sizing it. And I say that probably more for projects because, the out of the box that I've seen in project management is, you have a weekly check-in with the team, you have a monthly steering committee meeting, and then that's pretty much the tempo. But do you need the steering committee, or do you need a different level one that's down or something? Because, a lot of that's reporting. And then if you're stuck, can we have more money? Do we need more money? That kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But I think, it's good to have the standards, but then to me, it's more important, like with my team, like, do the meetings you need. If you're stuck, if there's a crisis, like an issue, then meet every day until you solve the crisis, and I think that's a big thing, especially when we talk about like project reporting. So what's at risk to us as a yellow light, right? Which to me means, yeah, we have, there may be an issue, but we have a plan, right? We're working it. It's just, we have it. And then a red or a critical one is, yeah, we have recent issues and we don't have a solid plan yet. But communicating that. So to me, communication is literally, what are the tasks on the plan, or here's the problems we're having, but it's all aspects of it and making that fit what works for that project, and then circles back to, is this meet the intent and get us toward done and the objectives. And the last one I have is a newer one for sure that I added from, is the handoff with the incoming and outgoing, from business case through, because often when there's, either people movement or things change or we need to move someone to another assignment, I need to hand off or get a handoff from somebody else. Um, and it's important to do that well, right? If someone's coming to take over a project, I don't want to be like, cool, thanks, bye. And then they have to figure everything out. And that's not just having a pile of documentation, but kind of a succinct, here's what's happening, here's the environment of the project, like the people and, the politics or whatever, here's where all the resources, all that kind of stuff. And that was, again, another thing, one in project management that I've gotten better at and learned, but in incident management and emergency management is when you hand off to somebody coming in, it might be after I've worked like 15 hours and I just want to leave. But if I just drop everything and someone's now in charge of 150 people, it's not fair. So to scale that to just a small software enhancement, it's still just as important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. And when you deploy this seven pillars, and you have an actual running project and the pressure mounts up, what's the first one that tends to be a challenge first?
Oh, yeah. I think on every lessons learned after action improvement, it's communication for sure.
Communication?
I mean, I think, yeah, I think so from, not necessarily that there's not enough, but maybe it's too much. It's too wordy. I'm a big fan of every project manager should be able to give an elevator pitch of what's going on with their project, like a sentence, right? And so if you could do that and then add a little bit more when there's a problem, then that's really what high level leaders need because they don't have time. Or for your team, that's like, well, why are we doing this? You can quickly give them the impact, positive or negative, and what happens. But communication, I think, and probably we do lessons learned surveys after every project, right? And then not just that, but an improvement plan, because we can gather the data and go, cool, thanks, and then just let it sit there and do it. But it's helpful to go, okay, well, how are we going to act on these ones that make sense to, or improve on the ones we're doing well? But communication is always on there, and that's the tough part, I think, of owning things as a project manager or program manager is owning that you communicated stuff, but people say you didn't communicate stuff. You know what I mean? It's like,
right, absolutely.
I never knew, and you're like, oh, it was on message, and it was an email, and it was in the meeting, and you're like, okay, well, that's that. I think humility part of going, well, how can I do it better then? Yeah.
What do you do to standardize comm channels? Like you just mentioned, right? Because nowadays folks have Zoom and MS Teams and Slack and chats and email obviously still and WhatsApp messages. Right. It's just crazy.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
We the cool thing is we do have standards where I am now with the health system is within I think 15 or 20 minutes for messages. Like if you message somebody, because we should all be online during the day, which is of course a challenge. Sure. If people are hybrid, remote, in person, that kind of stuff. And in a health system, because if you're chatting with clinical people or operational people, they're up walking around a lot more than I am, because I'm not in the hospital or I'm not the nurse manager or something like that. But we have standards for how long it should take to respond to an email, to a message, being on camera, those kind of things. And then for projects, we have, a standard where obviously we're going to use email for kind of general updates. I'm going to ping you directly on a messaging, if I really need something. And then the default, the end stop can't be, well, I emailed a message. It could be, well, did you call them? Because that still works. You know what I mean? In 2025, sure. People forget, I can directly phone call you also. And some people get stuck then. You're like, well, you got to, especially if it's a big deal and you're going to miss a deadline, or whatever the problem is. And then text. So, we make contact lists for every project, cell phones, especially for go lives, not just probably less people have desk work phones and more it's all cell phones, which is an interesting transition, right? When people were so protective of their cell phones and now like it's all cell phone communication, I feel like. But get direct contacts. So when all the other cool messaging things or email doesn't work because everybody has a lot of email, we just go direct with, or face to face, because most of our go lives too were, but you need to be there unless you really can't or something. So there's a lot of value in that. But yeah, it's just setting standards, and then there's the standard, which you could Google communications matrix for, a project. And it's, what are we going to, what's the meeting? How often? What's the medium? Who's involved? What's the point? And it's good to plan that stuff out. It's good practice. It's not, I'm not a big fan of extra administrative overhead, but that's one of the things that's worth documenting and talking about with the team, I think.
Yeah, it was actually my next question regarding the right size communication. How do you isolate topics per project, per group, per feature in either something like Slack when you have designated channels or something like this? But I guess that's part of that framework that you just mentioned.
It is, yeah, and that's up to what I expect in the onus in the delegation and the discretion for the project managers, at least on my team and in our whole organization. Of we have those standards. We know whether it's Scrum, Agile, Waterfall, PMI, whatever standard. There's tools. Cool. Start with that, and then talk to your team and see what works for everybody. And so right sizing really is about the conversation you have with the people on the team. That's going to make sure that there's not gaps in communication to the extent possible, because there will be, whether it's you gathering requirements or you're planning for the go live or you're during the go live or you're at the meeting or, and so if what, the other PM does or I do doesn't work for your project, then don't do it. But you have to do something. And knowing when to flip the switch on, we keep going back and forth in email and we can't solve the problem. So get people on the phone and talk to each
Right.
other every day, do a stand up for 15 minutes, right? Figure it out, have a work
Exactly.
session, pull people in, and that's the thing too. I think that's super valuable is, if you're going back and forth, like we deal with a lot of vendors, right? With internal folks that are IT and clinical and a vendor, and we just like going in circles, be like, we have to get a call and get in the same virtual room and like hash it out. And that's where I think the like escalation not being a 4-letter word helps, right? Where if nobody's getting on the call, at some point you have to go, hey boss, can you please help pull everybody together? Because and that circles back to early conversations about the military, where rank matters. Well, rank does matter when you need help, right? In the business world, and it's not a punitive tool. But if a vice president calls someone, it's more impactful than me. Unless I've built a super strong relationship with them.
Of course, I totally get it. And for learning purposes within that setup, do you encourage like retrospective meetings of some sort, or?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of, there's a whole methodology that I learned from Homeland Security. It's called a Homeland Security exercise evaluation. And the last part of that is improvement planning. So it's either in person or a survey, 3 up, 3 down kind of is a quick way. What are 3 strengths? What are 3 improvements? Or there's the whole, stop, start, keep doing kind of stuff. And so for sure, and we're a hybrid really. So we have a whole lot of agile stuff going on with our development of our electronic health record. And then we have a whole lot of waterfall stuff with infrastructure and just other things, or just where it doesn't fit the team. And I think just like right size communication, right size the methodology makes sense, because not everybody's got every day to do a stand up, during a sprint, and not every project needs to take however long just because of, you want to use waterfall or something like that. So so I think it's important to right size what you do and how you do it and how people meet and how they work together is really, really important with them.
Absolutely. Have you ever had an experience or tried doing this asynchronously? Like people just write their updates and leave it on the chat or email it to the PM every morning or every evening or whenever they get the chance. And then by the end of the day, you have a compiled, input from everyone, where they are, what their blockers are and impediments and whatnot.
We have to some extent, probably more. We're doing, I think, some training module development, and we set up in teams like a Kanban board, and each trainer or developer was responsible for just moving it to the right phase. So we weren't gatekeeping, or slowing anything down. Probably less of a do your update, but I've done that before too, where, whatever the tool is, it's like, hey, before this time, just make sure you're updated. The PMs do that across the teams. They talk to their teams. So when we get to, our weekly or bi-weekly, hey, reviews or stand-ups for the whole portfolio, it's just there. So we have a mix of that. And it varies too by project, where, is a PM assigned on the project or not, or is it like a manager? And then you get some variability, but the good thing is we're cross-pollinating kind of some of what we use as PMs, and what we could share. That's some basic, tracking things. And I'm a huge fan of doing that, having folks, drag and drop the status on a board. Like it's so
Sure.
easy and it's so straightforward, and you pull it up. And I know for me, pictures work, and I know for a lot of leaders, they work.
Yeah.
You're like, there it is, or stoplight colors or same kind of things.
Absolutely. I love the visual information sharing as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. So let's shift gears a bit.
Sure.
Your book outlines 7 pillars for more balanced life. And these are taking ownership, living with mindfulness, getting regular movement, setting and pushing boundaries, creating or reestablishing connection, prioritizing sleep, having faith in something larger than yourself. And of these all that I just listed, which has been the hardest for you personally to practice?
That's a good question. I knew you were going to ask this too. So it's like I would say probably the one that just popped in my mind without trying to filter or sound right is probably faith, honestly, because I've gone back and forth and it's been a roller coaster. I grew up going to Catholic school, going to Sunday school, and then got old enough where I could say, I don't want to go because it's early on Sunday, and then get away from it. And then I remember reading the Navy issued little Bible, sitting in the, in the critical care unit, depending on what's happening with patients or my personal life or something like that. And then, circling back to it. So that one, I think, because it's less directly provable and noticeable, I will say, if that makes sense. And I've been the same person that's like, oh, I want to see a sign or this. And then when you have it more so, which I've learned and just been so appreciative from folks, family and friends that do, I've always been like, man, I wish I could have that, right? Even when I was not in a headspace to have it, when I was like raging at the sky and, just all horrible things and stuff, it's like, it's just amazing to me, folks that have that, and I'm developing more in that, and it's a practice. It's just like all the other pillars or anything else too. There's no, to me at least, aha moment as far as, oh, cool, now I've got it. It's a constant, practice, and big helps to me were I mentioned, family, so my mother-in-law, and then also my there's someone else that you named Joyce Meyer, who she went through a horrible childhood. She was abused, right? And she's a great spiritual leader. But then she's also, one of the things she said that's great. And her message is like this, right? She's like, believe. She gives you some, stuff about the Bible, and then she's also, but God's not going to come tie your shoes for you. So you're like, it's a
Right.
great balance of believe, do all that, but you got to get off your butt and do some work. And so that really resonates with me. And then kind of how, the outline of the faith and what you choose to believe is to me less important as far as sharing with others. But when there's something that you believe is bigger than you, then it takes a lot off your shoulders, particularly when you think about, I'm 51, midlife, right? So I am closer to not being here than, my kids, just on a practical level. And you start to think about it when you get older. And then when you start to lose, parents, or your friends start to lose parents around the same age, you're like, man, it's heavy. It helps. It helps. And it does to me, at least I found, it's helpful to look for practical things to help shore up your faith. Like by looking at my kids, my wife, I'm like, oh, that's pretty amazing miracle, that they're here. And if you look at the stats on the probability of us being alive, it's
Yeah.
pretty astounding.
It's very humbling for me. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Thanks for sharing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your own philosophy of owning your mind and moving your body, and anchoring your spirit, how does it show when you lead others?
Yeah, it's kind of a short saying of the pillars. Essentially, I think, the owning your mind part, because we mentioned ownership, and even when, like, I didn't not do this update, I did not do this thing, but I was asked to lead this project, so I have to own it all. Or being on a meeting where we're going round and round and it's not quite time to step in, because that's a skill, is, okay, how can I help this conversation? But sometimes you just need to let conversations go, or you hear something on a call and you can't, you shouldn't show that all that emotion on your face. So part of it is kind of your emotional control. The other part is, working through hard things. I mentioned, I do jiu-jitsu, do cold plunges, like I do deep breathing, Wim Hof stuff, which I highly recommend. And so that helps you control your mind that, like, doesn't want to hold your breath when you're holding your breath. It doesn't want to be in the cold thing. It doesn't want to push someone, gets crushed by other people or thrown or whatever. Or you don't want to fold the clothes that you just took out because you're tired at the end of the day. So it's the little things too. It's not just big, cool sounding stuff. It's all the little things. Or maybe I want to go, surf the net or play games, video games, but my kids want me to go see the cool thing they put together. Right. So I think owning your mind is really, you deciding, not your emotions only deciding. And I'm a huge fan of emotions and letting them out and showing them. Maybe with my boys, I'm like, hey man, you don't have to hide what you're feeling in the right way. But I think it's all kind of tied around that, helping push through hardship, helping be where you are, and the mindfulness thing and that, regular meditation I do is very helpful, because it's just you. And again, it's you not on your phone or on a laptop or lost in a movie or something like that.
Absolutely. And there's so many distractions, right? With social media and whatnot.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And the movement, the moving your body, I think is critical. It's, if there was an order of the pillars, that's in competition for one for me. Cause that's, when you're it's proven, exercise is as good as some of the medications people get for depression, anxiety, and other stuff, right? It reduces the risk of it reduces the risk of almost everything, essentially, right? And that doesn't mean something bad couldn't happen randomly. However, when you're really anxious, move a muscle, change a thought is real, right? If you're feeling dancing in place and walking, or, and it's just good for you. And that links to your mind, right? If you're going to go push yourself to do push-ups or hard yoga pose, which is amazingly hard to do when you're like, wait a minute, I'm just trying to stand here and do this and balance. And you see that, I do a lot of yoga just from YouTube in my living room. I'm like, it's way harder. I'm like, I can go deadlift 350 pounds and I can't do this pose. What's going on? But it's
All right.
great for you too, So the
True.
body movement is just, it's connected to everything else, and you'll feel
Coordination.
better. Yeah. All that kind of stuff. And then anchor your spirit is, it's not just faith, like we were talking about. I think it's walking in the woods, right? It's, being nice to other people, right? It's practical stuff, taking your shopping cart back, like, being just, trying to be the best person you can. And one thing I found when I was going through hard stuff is helping other people helps you way more than you think it does. So,
So
yeah.
you mentioned jiu-jitsu and deep breathing techniques. How one can pick up their own, tool set of these exercises and those activities to fend off stress and yeah.
Yeah, the great thing about the deep breathing is on YouTube. Look up Wim Hof breathing, and he's got like guided sessions. I just sit in my living room and hit play, and it's 3 rounds. You breathe in and out 30 times, hold your breath for a minute, then do the same thing except you hold your breath for a minute and a half. The last 2, and so I just do it there. I did read his book, which I recommend. It's kind of a cool story and how it came about. Did research on how it helps, what it does. But the breathing you could do on your own in your living room, which is great. So if you have an internet connection and YouTube, which most people do these days on your phone or something, you can do it, which I think is awesome, because there's a lot of good, healthy things. And there's probably folks that are like, that doesn't work. But for me, I feel like my lung capacity is better.
Would you be able to share a link after the show, and I'll just put it in the notes for our audience?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so that video, yeah, it's great. Very, very helpful. Yeah, I mean, and again, that's kind of the anchor your mind. I mean, I know I'm sitting on my couch, and when I first started doing it, when I'm at like 45 seconds holding my breath, everything in me is like, breathe. But you're like, no, the point is hold your breath. So it's just a quick mental exercise. And, if you're in the hospital, you've seen people in the hospital after surgery or they're sick or something, they have this thing called an incentive spirometer. So it's like a tube where you raise the ball, you go, and so it's lung workout to help your lungs get stronger. And it's very similar to that, right? You feel it in your lungs afterwards. For jiu-jitsu, there's the good thing about this day and age starting jiu-jitsu. There's jiu-jitsu gyms all over the world. It's a matter of Googling jiu-jitsu near me, and proximity is a huge factor. Like, I'm spoiled. Mine's 10 minutes away. Some people drive 45 minutes an hour.
Wonderful.
But yeah, but there are a lot. There's, I'm sure some near you. So it's gotten popular, which is good. And if it's close to you, you'll go. And if it's not, you probably won't. But my recommendation is call the one near you. Say, hey, can I come in and either watch or do a trial class? And then see if you like it or not. It's essentially a mix of wrestling, judo, and Japanese jiu-jitsu. So
I was just going to ask if it's for anyone at any age.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 51. I started when I was 44. So, and
Okay.
and now uniquely, I'm in a college town. So every spring and fall, we get like, 18-year-old guys that come in, and you're like, all right, let's test your jiu-jitsu, because you get these young athletic folks that speed wise you maybe can't keep up with. But jiu-jitsu wise you can. It's pretty immediate. I mean, we have women that, aren't that big, and they would choke the life out of some people. And it's a really cool. So and in fact, I actually wrote a post and shared a story. There's a guy in our class, he's 67, and he started like a year and a half ago. So
Okay.
it is hard on you. It's hard on your body, but also he's lost probably 50 some pounds. So there's a saying. So even if you work out, I worked out regularly before I started years ago, but there's in shape and then there's jiu-jitsu in shape. But if you think about, wrestlers, you can tell like wrestlers, they're just going to go, and it's not quite that intense, a different kind of thing. But if you think about, you're moving constantly for at least an hour, 2-3 times a week, it's a lot, but it's great. I recommend it for sure. And back to Jocko, he's always talking about jiu-jitsu. I was like, yeah, I should try that. So part like in 2018 is when I started. I was like, you know what, I'll also try this. So I kind of into it.
Brilliant. I mean, there's so many different fighting styles and schools and
There are.
yeah, methodologies. I don't know how to even call them. And I was just curious, how did you land on jiu-jitsu in the first place? Because when I was very young, we're talking like 6, 7 years old, my dad brought me to a karate Shotokan class, and it stuck with me for a couple of years. And then by the age of 12, I got into other things, started
You want to do it, yeah.
Getting into other things in high school and whatnot. So I gave it up, and I it's probably one of these things that I regret in life, that I never continued.
Never too late. Get back in there, yeah.
to get back, yes.
And I think
But
that's the
I'm
thing too,
curious
like you
about
mentioned,
jiu-jitsu.
Shotokan karate, like, it doesn't have to be jujitsu or Shotokan. It could be like, if there's something near you and you enjoy it, awesome. And use it for what it is. I mean, it's a great workout. You're moving, you're kicking, you're punching.
Exactly. I mean, one of the reasons why I asked this and how did you land on these activities is because when I had an depression episode in 2016, everyone around was like, go, get some shoes and start running. And I realized I hate running. So it wasn't really helpful. Yeah. So eventually someone showed me that I'm really into, it turns out I'm really into cycling, but it took me a while to figure it out. That I really enjoy the fact that, I push the pedals and off I go, and I can do 40 clicks around the city or around the, it's not a lot, like in 2.5 hours, just still not major speed. But at that point, I realized the trip itself became a reward, which is fascinating because I really hated running and I really didn't like, I don't like gym still.
Yeah.
So it's a massive issue for me to go out and go train.
That's a huge point for movement, right? Getting your movement in general is an exercise is that has to fit what you like or what you're going to do. Now that is, I'm sure during every ride, you're not like, I love this, because sometimes you're like, this sucks, there's a hill or, something. But I think, yeah. Oh yeah, it's true. Headwind coming at you or something. Yeah. I think that's the thing is some folks, whether they go to a gym and then it's a bad experience and now they're just burn out of it, or they could go to a jiu-jitsu class, they get crushed, they're out of it, or they could cycle. Like, not every exercise fits everyone, and that's where you see there's so many fitness influencers where if folks that are looking to end up working out, to moving, to exercising something more than they're doing now, if you start following folks or seeing folks and they're like, never do this, always do this, unless it's like a super dangerous move, which makes sense, like don't drop barbells on your face, something silly. But if they're like, you should never do these kind of exercises, you should never do this kind of sport, you're like, I usually don't listen to them, because there's not a lot of, definitive yeses or nos when it comes to exercise. I think anyway. I mean, it's as far as, some people just do body weight stuff. Some people do Olympic lift. Like there's just so many, cycling, rowing, swimming. It's just, I find do a mix of everything is helpful, and keep your eye on it, or find the thing you love and stick with it. And to your point, like you said, the output of it is mentally and physically you feel better.
Absolutely. And for someone who is already in this vicious circle of high stress roles, like in healthcare, like in tech, in public safety, how can they find a moment to stop, to change the perspective, to start applying those life pillars with their days being so chaotic?
Oh yeah. A shameless self plug, they can go to my website and do this pillars pathfinder. So there's a cool thing. I mean, ChatGPT is very helpful. So I was like, hey, could we make a form where someone could say, I'm experiencing this or that, and answer a series of questions, and the logic took them to, you should work on this one, whether it's, movement, mindful, whatever. But I think, the first thing is movement, like start working out every day, do something, right? Go for a walk in the morning, do yoga, go cycle, do push-ups, something. That starting your day with that changes your whole day, right? You've already done something hard. So when you're in the meeting and someone's complaining that the coffee's warm, you're like, cool, I just cycled 40 kilometers. You're like, great. Yes. The perspective is huge. But then I think the other thing is, as far as the mindfulness piece, is I actually have on my calendar every day for 10 minutes, get some headspace. So 10 minutes, I'd like to say I do it every day. Sometimes I don't. The majority of each day I do. So I'll go do a 10-minute meditation using an app of the same name, but it can be anything, right? Just 10 minutes of breathe, follow your breath, just sitting there. You don't have your phone, you're listening, whether it's city sounds, country sounds, whatever. But it's just you with your eyes closed breathing. And that's a huge difference. And, you can even do that in 5 minutes. So you can have a stressful meeting and you have another meeting in 15 minutes. Go take some time, go walk around, go, do something. I think is just build it into your schedule. And I know folks are busy, but folks aren't back to back every minute of every
Mhm.
day busy, right? Unless, yeah, I can't even think of when you would be if you're working in the assembly line, but even then you get a break. You know what I mean? So it's a different,
Sure, sure. I'm more thinking about situations like something very stressful happens in the morning and adrenaline response kicks in
oh,
and it
yeah,
sets my mood for the entire day, to be honest with you, till I
right, right.
till I run out of fuel by 6 7
Mm,
p.m. I'm just going to be really in the zone. And that's not healthy, not every day, not even
right,
through a single day, doing like 9 10 hours or more like this,
right.
especially as we get older. And I realize that I can't break this. When I'm in this,
Mm,
it even has a physical response. Like I get tense in my back and I feel like I'm in a tunnel.
yeah,
My laser focus, I'm getting very productive. Don't get me wrong. I love it afterwards with the results most of the time.
right,
But I just feel like, I just run a marathon, which I don't know how it is, but I
right,
guess so. And that's not great day to day, right? Like,
right. Yeah, I
um,
think acutely similar to breathing. There's all different types of breathing. Box breathing, the Wim Hof breathing. There's like the two in your nose, one out of your mouth, real quick. That lowers so many different things. But the
right.
breath is a key to your nervous system as well. Taking that time to just disconnect, and then I think also perspective. The most influential book I've ever read is called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And for folks that haven't read it, him and his family were taken during the Holocaust. He was in concentration camps, 4 different ones, and he started to put this story together. And even in all that circumstance, right, his one of his perspectives, and I think he actually got this from Nietzsche, was basically if he who has any why, has a why can figure out any how, but that's another perspective, right? So, and everybody gets that. I get that. You can have just a horrible start to the day, like you said, like, why am I doing this? Right. And so it helps feed my family, keep my lights on, keep say, all that kind of stuff. And then go, okay, how am I going to get through it? And the easy answer could just be where you're going to, because then I think back to, I'm not barefoot in the winter having to break rocks apart when someone's going to beat me if I screw up. You know what I mean? And that's a huge, to me, cycle of feedback of, okay, that was, it's not that
Let's
hard.
get
I mean,
perspective. Let's get
yeah,
perspective.
for
Exactly.
sure.
Yeah.
I think getting perspective is helpful. It doesn't have to be that extreme, but there are
Sure.
plenty of people in much worse situations, and I think it's helpful to remember that. And I don't remember it all the time. Sometimes I'm like, complaining about the silliest things, first world problems, right, as we call them, and you're like, um, but sometimes we do need to give ourselves a kick in the butt too. Or that's the other thing is phone a friend that will, or family member that will kick you in the butt and be like, I used to talk to my dad when I was frustrated about jobs or wanting a new thing. We're always looking for that new thing or this or that, and he's like, yeah, but does your paycheck show up on time? And you're like, yes. Yeah. So I think practical reminders and perspective is also really helpful in addition to the physical stuff.
Yeah. I think this is sinful human nature that
Mm,
we get used to so fast and so easily to the current state of affairs that we don't see how it used to be, right? For
right.
even for the previous generation,
Mm.
like I don't know, Poland was being rebuilt after World War II, and
Oh yeah.
sometimes we complain about the most ridiculous stuff ever. And my parents would say, "Yeah, but you know what? We were happy to have a roof over our heads."
Right.
So
When's the last time you
so
were in a
so
bread line? You're like,
exactly,
got me.
exactly. Cool. So, where do you think is the direct link between your pillars for life and your pillars for projects? Where do you think they overlap most clearly?
Probably the intent, the ownership. Like, you are your leader, right? You don't have to have a team. Like you're leading yourself in this life, which means you have to own where you are in this life. And there's folks, that are in and have been in, like we just said, in horrible situations, and they've come out to be super successful, not just monetarily, but in helping like the world. So I think the intent for yourself of what is my mission, and this is a lot for folks coming out of the military or law enforcement or retiring from something they've done their whole lives. They lose their mission, and so reestablishing the intent for yourself, giving yourself that new mission, and then taking ownership of like, okay, how are we going to get there? What education you need or resources or whatever. I think that's the overlap is the intent and the ownership for yourself before you can do that well for anybody else.
This is brilliant. Reestablishing the intent. I love that.
Mhm.
It's really cool. I think at any age, a lot of people could really benefit from having that in their mind. Brilliant.
It's great you say that because so I go on Reddit. I don't take it as gospel like Wikipedia, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's very helpful to one to get exposure to give ideas to. So in the project management forum, I give feedback and then even like the life for self improvement. There's so many 20 somethings that'll ask like, is it over? Is it too late? I'm like, you're 22 years old. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so I think that, in today's, there's a very unrealistic expectation because we can see these very small percentage of random people on all these platforms, like on a yacht or in largely probably a fake plane fuselage that they have, but whatever it is. But I think to your point, like, you can reset if you're 60, and some of the folks, like I mentioned, Joyce Meyer, she didn't start and she's an international person in her 40s. Other hugely, successful folks didn't start till 40s, 50s, 30, whatever it is, it's never really too late, right, to start. Now, if you're 75, you're probably not going to play professional football, but in the business or for yourself. And there's other stories of, folks that old starting to like lift weights and now can walk more and they're not hunched over, all these things. So correcting yourself in many different ways or improving yourself, it's never too late to start.
When you mentioned that metrics matter, but people matter more, right? That's one of your quotes. I really like this one.
Thank you.
How does that philosophy play out in balancing your project KPIs, your deliverables, and actual team well-being? Do not make any, cut corners or sacrifice people along the way, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought when I put that out when I did the episode, I was like, wow, that's a really good perspective. And then on my drive home this past week, I heard a better one from somebody that's more well known. I was like, wait, that's the same thing. So Simon Sinek, if you've heard of him, huge leadership,
course.
Guys, start with why, that kind of stuff. He was on a podcast called Masters of Scale, who's Reid Hoffman, who started LinkedIn. So cool conversation. And so one thing Simon Sinek shared was he studied military leadership, particularly the Marines, and they have a basic school where they train all their officers, and they have a checklist. They'll have teams and they solve problems, and here's a puzzle and things like that. And they will nowhere on that checklist, as he said, did they complete it? Right. It's just a matter, did they work together? Did they delegate? Did someone make decisions? They were decisive. It's all these attributes more so they're looking for than did you finish it? And then Simon Sinek shared, in business, we do the opposite. So we're all about, did you complete it? What's the measure? Is it at risk? Well, why is it at risk? And then we freak out as opposed to like, what's behind that, right? Is it us? Is it the people? Did the person have a family member that said, like what's the real root of why these numbers on a dashboard or a report are that way? Or are we in a recession and everything takes 3 weeks longer? Something like that. So I think I can look at a dashboard and there's a bunch of reds and yellows and think, oh my gosh, what's going on? And other folks can look at it. And that's where, to me, the ownership comes in of, well, which one of us owns helping get that better, right? Too, because it's easy to go, oh, why aren't you doing this? You're like, well, let's look at it holistically and figure out why we aren't doing, fixing something or whatever the problem is. So to me, it's just really looking at the human factor behind anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And separation, I call it separation of symptoms with an actual cause, right? Because the actual cause is very visible when you focus on individuals and human beings, but symptoms is your business KPIs potentially, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the cause for actual stress, I think. Brilliant. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I love reports. They're easy. They're quick to share, that kind of stuff. But it's, the real scoop you get, obviously, when you have a conversation with somebody, like what's really happening on there.
Totally. So if someone is listening to us today and feels overwhelmed and stuck, either with their professional life or personally, what's the first small, encouraging step you would suggest they take to start moving forward?
Set your alarm in the morning and go for a walk or do a workout. I always come back to it because again, you start your day, it gets your mind not thinking about what you're thinking about probably, or what you're ruminating on or something like that. And it doesn't have to be a 30-minute mile, I'm borrowing quotes and stuff from all over the place, is still a mile, right? And whether you walk it or not, it's like before I exercise on in my garage gym, I walk a mile with my dogs, right? That's not fast. Half the time I listen to kind of daily devotion, I either have to take my earpods out and just listen to the birds. It's a great way to start the day, and then go, okay, now I'm going to do whatever thing I'm going to do. But I really think that the whole movement is medicine, which multiple people have said is so true and so helpful. And then from there, determine like what's the legitimate. I talk about this in my book of what am I doing well, what am I not, right? It's and a lot of the self-assessment stuff's super straightforward. And certainly I didn't come up with it. It's like a pros and cons list. It's like we were talking about lessons learned. This is your lessons learned for your life. So what have you learned that got you here? What were you doing that was not good that got you here? What were you doing that was good that is helping you? And then plan towards fixing what's not going well and build on what is going well. And I don't think it needs to be much more complicated than that. There's a lot of other stuff out there, but if you keep it simple, you'll also, just like going to the gym, right? If you keep it simple and do something you like, you'll follow up on it. But the key is you have to keep following up on it and not look for somebody else to solve your problem for you. That doesn't mean don't go to the doctor. That doesn't mean talk to somebody if you know what I mean. But you have to own it. It's just like if, I talk about being in health, and I work in healthcare, but going with like my dad when he was sick, like you have to have an advocate that's going to talk to you, but now you're your advocate inside your own head. So keep doing that. Keep advocating for yourself.
And setting up that clock for waking up earlier, you mean like 5:30 right away, or do you do it gradually, 8, 7?
Yeah, I mean, I think enough time that you can get up, get dressed, do whatever exercise you're going to do, and then have time to, shower, get dressed, and go to work whenever you do is what makes sense. You don't have to pick a time. If we were strictly, Jocko followers, we'd say 4:30, but I don't get up at 4:30, unless I'm traveling or something like that. But I think it has to work for what gives you time to then do the rest of your day. So if early for you is 9 because you go to work at 11, great. If it's 5:30 or 6, excellent. The other thing about getting up early to me is, one, in the summer, it's not as hot. So practically it's much better. And you get a sunrise usually, right? So if you can time it where you get up a little before sunrise, that's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. And does it mean always getting that full 8 hours of sleep? So getting to bed like at 8 p.m. previous day to wake up at 4, or 9 p.m. to wake up at 5?
For sure. Yep. Yeah, definitely adjust, and that's why, to me, the pillar 6 is sleep, because that was an area I was horrible at. And that's the thing, if you're not sleeping well, is you got to put time in to improve your sleep, and it's not going to be fun, because then you do. And I talk about these, and something I learned is like sleep restriction, which is awful. So if I get in bed and I lay there and I don't actually fall asleep till 2, well, next time I'm not going to go to bed till then and still get up on time. So basically you're going to make yourself more tired over and over again. Don't drive long distance, don't do unsafe stuff. That's my caveat, right? But to the point is, but ideally 7, 8 hours of sleep I try and get every night. And if you have to adjust, and I think when you get a better handle on your sleep, then you can adjust it. So you're not, I was super strict, right? When I kind of did my reset of nobody be loud, don't turn any lights on at 8 o'clock. It's like, but then you're, and my family was great for a while. Then I realized like, hey dude, like, it's you live with everybody else too. And as you get better at it, and as you kind of normalize your sleep and try and adjust it, stay up a little late and watch a movie with the kids, or sit on the porch as the sun goes down, do that kind of stuff. And you're not going to get that sleep every day, but if the majority of the time you get enough sleep, it's very helpful. The other thing to that point, which I really think of, is if you don't, there's another thing that I do every now and then called yoga nidra, which I heard about from Andrew Huberman, of like a 20-minute kind of nap, right? Where it's like a guided relaxation thing. And that's actually pretty restorative. So whether it's travel or you just stayed up late with friends, or whatever reason, do 20 minutes of that, to me, has been helpful on those days too.
What is it called?
It's yoga nidra. I forget the person I listened to, but if you look it up on Spotify, there's tons. If you do like 20-minute NIDRA, I think it is. But yeah, it's basically like a deep relaxation thing where you're not quite asleep. I always make sure I set an alarm though, so I don't fall asleep for the rest of the day. Or something.
Absolutely.
That's another one of those resets. If it's a work day and you have a gap between meetings, you'd be like, oh, let me go do one of these, set an alarm well before you have to be somewhere. But it's helpful too. But yeah, I focus so much on movement, or have talked so much about that, but the recovery is just as, or important as the activity stuff.
Totally.
Yeah,
Wow. Awesome. That's really, really insightful. Thank you.
absolutely.
Kevin, thank you for sharing your story and your insights with us. You've shown us that good leadership and good living often share the same roots, the clarity, the purpose, and caring for people. And most importantly, it's all about ownership and starting with ourselves and setting an example. So to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in into The Dev is in the Details today. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who might be facing big projects or big life storms. And if you're wrestling with how to build projects or teams that last, or how to anchor your own stability, feel free to reach out to myself or Kevin. Thanks for joining us, and until next time.